London, England, November 2019. In the Harrison family's living room, an absolute silence freezes the air as an 8-year-old boy points to the television screen showing a Queen documentary and speaks words no one expected to hear. "That's wrong," he whispers with unwavering certainty, while his parents feel goosebumps rising. "I didn't wear that jacket at Wembley. That was from the Magic Tour. And the microphone stand was shorter. I had them cut it specifically." What they were about to witness would challenge everything they thought they knew about one of rock's greatest legends. Oliver Harrison is 8 years old, has piercing blue eyes, and a mind that works differently than most. Since age 3, the British boy developed an obsessive fascination with Queen's music, but not like a typical fan. He didn't just listen to the songs, he corrected documentaries. He completed unfinished melodies. He described recording sessions he'd never witnessed. He sang in a 4-octave range number child should possess. His parents thought it was just unusual talent, until that November evening when Oliver stood in front of the television, tears streaming down his face, and said 5 words that changed everything.
"That's me.
That's me.
I was Freddie Mercury.
I was Freddie Mercury." Welcome to Reincarnation Chronicles, where we explore real cases of children who remember past lives. If you're curious about the mysteries of reincarnation, hit that like button and subscribe. All right, let's dive in. Oliver James Harrison was born on September 5, 2011 in Hammersmith, London, exactly 20 years and 1 day after Freddie Mercury died in his Kensington home just miles away. His parents, Catherine and David Harrison, were ordinary working professionals. Catherine worked as a primary school teacher, and David was an accountant at a mid-sized firm in the city. They lived in a comfortable, semi-detached house in the suburbs, led quiet lives, and had no particular connection to the music industry or rock history. Oliver was their first and only child. His birth was unremarkable, his early development normal. Nothing in Oliver's first 2 years suggested anything unusual. He played with toy cars, watched children's programs, and attended playgroup like any other child in suburban London. But when Oliver turned 3 years old, something remarkable happened. It started one afternoon when Catherine put on a classic rock radio station. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody came on. Oliver, who had been playing with building blocks, suddenly stopped. He stood completely still, listening with intensity beyond his years. When the song ended, he turned to his mother with tears in his eyes. "Play it again, please, Mummy." Catherine played it 5 more times that afternoon. Each time, Oliver listened with the same rapt attention, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, sometimes moving his hands as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Over the next weeks, Oliver became obsessed with Queen. He listened to their music constantly, singing with perfect pitch and accuracy. But it was the way he sang that disturbed Catherine. He didn't sing like a child imitating a song. He sang with phrasing, dynamics, and understanding that seemed impossible. When he sang "Somebody to Love," he would close his eyes, throw his head back, gripping an imaginary microphone, moving with stage presence that shouldn't exist in a 3-year-old. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Catherine asked him one day. Oliver looked at her with confusion, as if the question made no sense. "I have always moved like this. This is how you perform. This is how you connect with the audience." The audience. A 3-year-old talking about connecting with an audience? By age 4, Oliver's obsession had expanded beyond just listening. He started making statements that troubled his parents deeply. He would talk about "when I was big" and "when I was Freddie." He described a house in Kensington with a Japanese garden with specific details about the interior that he couldn't possibly know. He talked about a man named Jim and a woman named Mary, with an intimacy that suggested deep personal relationships. Catherine and David took Oliver to a child psychologist, worried that their son was developing some kind of dissociative disorder. Dr. Sarah Mitchell spent several sessions with Oliver, conducting various tests and observations. Her conclusions surprised them. Oliver doesn't show signs of dissociation or fantasy disorder, Dr. Mitchell explained. He's remarkably grounded in reality. He knows he's Oliver Harrison, he knows who his parents are, he knows where he lives. But he also has these other memories. He doesn't seem confused about them. He simply accepts them as real experiences from what he calls before. But that's impossible, David said. He's talking about being Freddie Mercury, Freddie Mercury. The man died in 1991. Oliver wasn't born until 2011. Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. I know how it sounds, but I'd like to suggest something. There's a researcher at King's College London, Dr. Eleanor Ashford, who studies cases of children with unusual memories. She's open-minded but scientifically rigorous. Would you be willing to let her meet Oliver? Catherine and David exchanged glances. They were educated, rational people. They didn't believe in reincarnation or past lives. But they also couldn't explain what was happening to their son. They agreed to the meeting. Dr. Eleanor Ashford met Oliver in the spring of 2016 when he was 4 years old. She had spent 15 years researching children who claimed memories of previous lives, traveling around the world to document cases. She had seen impressive cases before, but she had also seen many that turned out to have ordinary explanations. She approached Oliver's case with cautious skepticism. Her first session with Oliver took place at the Harrison home. She brought with her a collection of photographs, some of Freddie Mercury and Queen, others of different musicians and bands from the same era. She mixed them randomly and showed them to Oliver one by one with no labels or identifying information. Oliver, can you tell me if you recognize any of these people? The 4-year-old looked through the photographs carefully. He immediately identified every picture of Freddie Mercury, regardless of the era or setting. That's me when I was younger, in the 70s. That's me at Live Aid. That's me at my house. That's me with Mary. He correctly identified the other Queen band members. That's Brian. He's the guitarist. He's very gentle and very tall. That's Roger, the drummer. He's energetic, and sometimes we argued about the music. That's John, the bass player. He's quiet, but brilliant. Dr. Ashford showed him photographs of other rock stars from the same era. Oliver shook his head at most. Of them. I don't know them. But when she showed him a picture of Elton John, Oliver smiled. I know him. We were friends. He's flamboyant like me, but in a different way. His real name is Reginald. This was accurate. Elton John's birth name is Reginald Dwight, and he and Freddie Mercury had indeed been close friends. Dr. Ashford then moved to more specific questions. Oliver, can you tell me about your childhood? Where did you grow up? The boy's face became thoughtful. I was born in Zanzibar. It's an island. My family lived there because my father worked for the British government. My real name wasn't Freddie, it was Farrokh Bulsara. My parents called me Freddie later when we moved to England. Every detail was accurate. Freddie Mercury was born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946, in Stone Town, Zanzibar. His father worked as a cashier for the British Colonial Office. What do you remember about Zanzibar? It was hot, very hot. The house was white with a courtyard. I remember the smell of spices from the market and the ocean. I loved the ocean. but we had to leave when I was young because there was violence. A revolution. We moved to England, to Middlesex. This was historically accurate. The Bulsara family fled Zanzibar during the 1964 revolution and settled in Middlesex, England. Dr. Ashford continued the interview for 2 hours that first day. Oliver described Freddie's time at boarding school in India, his art college years in London, the formation of Queen, early performances in small clubs, the breakthrough success, the massive stadium tours. He spoke about the creative process of writing songs, the dynamics within the band, the pressures of fame. But what struck Dr. Ashford most wasn't just the factual accuracy. It was the emotional authenticity. When Oliver talked about Freddie's relationship with Mary Austin, his voice filled with genuine affection. Mary was my soulmate. I loved her more than anyone, even though I couldn't be with her the way she wanted. I wasn't made that way. But she understood me. She never judged me. When I died, I left her garden lodge because she was my family. This matched Freddie's own descriptions of Mary Austin. He had famously said she was his common-law wife, the love of his life, and he had indeed left her his home, Garden Lodge, in his will. When Oliver talked about discovering he had AIDS, his small face showed genuine fear and sadness. I knew what it meant. In the 80s, AIDS was a death sentence. I watched friends die from it. Terrible deaths. I was so scared. But I didn't want people to know until I was ready. I wanted to keep working. Music was all I had. Dr. Ashford asked about specific songs. Oliver could describe the creation of Bohemian Rhapsody in remarkable detail. We recorded it at Trident Studios. It took 3 weeks just for the vocals. The opera section had over 180 overdubs. The tape was worn so thin you could see through it. The producers said it was too long for radio. 6 minutes. But I knew it would work. I could hear it all in my head before we even started recording. Music historians have confirmed all these details. The vocal overdubs, the translucent tape, the length concerns, all accurate. Over the following months, Dr. Ashford conducted extensive research. She created a list of 156 specific claims Oliver had made about Freddie Mercury's life. She then verified each claim against biographical records, interviews with people who knew Freddie, and historical documentation. The results were extraordinary. Of the 156 claims, 149 were verified as completely accurate. 4 were impossible to verify due to lack of records. Only 3 were potentially inaccurate, and even those weren't clearly wrong, but rather couldn't be definitively confirmed. An accuracy rate of over 95%. This was far higher than chance or even educated guessing could explain. But Dr. Ashford needed more than just verified facts. She needed to test whether Oliver had knowledge that wasn't publicly available. She contacted Peter Freestone, Freddie Mercury's personal assistant for the last 12 years of his life. Freestone had written a book about his time with Freddie, but there were still private details he had never published. Freestone agreed to meet Oliver, more out of curiosity than belief. The meeting took place in London in the autumn of 2017. Oliver was 6 years old. Freestone was in his 70s, a dignified man who still carried the grief of losing his friend and employer 26 years earlier. When Oliver walked into the room, he stopped abruptly. He stared at Freestone for a long moment. Then his face broke into a huge smile. "Phoebe, you're still alive. You look older, but it's you." Freestone felt chills. Freddie had called him Phoebe, a nickname only Freddie and close friends used. It wasn't in any books or documentaries. How could this child know? "What did I used to ask you to do every morning?" Freestone asked, testing the boy. Oliver didn't hesitate. "You brought me tea, Earl Grey, in the blue and white china cup. And you opened the curtains in a specific way, left side first, because I didn't like the sun hitting my face too suddenly. And you would tell me what calls had come in overnight because I hated answering the phone." Freestone sat down heavily. These were intimate daily routines that had never been published anywhere. Not in his book, not in interviews. These were the small, private details of Freddie's daily life that only someone who had lived them would know. "Tell me about Garden Lodge," Freestone said quietly. "Describe the house." Oliver closed his eyes as if visualizing it. "The house is on Logan Place in Kensington. Big black gates. The outside is brick. Inside, the entrance hall has black and white marble floors. The sitting room is on the right when you come in. It has Japanese art on the walls because I loved Japanese things. The dining room is through there, with the long table where we had dinner parties." He continued, describing room after room, the layout, the furniture, the artwork, the Japanese garden that Freddie had created in the back. Freestone confirmed every single detail. "In my bedroom," Oliver continued, his eyes still closed, "there was a Tiffany lamp on the bedside table. The bed faced the windows to the garden. I had so many pillows. I collected them. And there was a photograph of Mary on the dresser. Always. Even when Jim was living with me, Mary's photo was always there." Freestone had tears in his eyes. "How do you know these things? How is this possible?" Oliver opened his eyes and looked at the old man with a mixture of sadness and warmth. "Because I lived there, Phoebe. Because you took care of me. Because those were my last years, in that house, with you and Jim and Mary visiting. Because I died in that bedroom, in that bed, and you were there." Freestone's meeting with Oliver opened doors that had been closed. Word spread quietly through Freddie's inner circle. A few agreed to meet the boy who claimed to remember being their friend. Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner during his final years, had passed away in 2010. But Mary Austin, the woman Freddie called the love of his life, was still alive. Dr. Ashford reached out carefully, not wanting to cause distress. Mary had guarded her privacy fiercely for decades, protecting Freddie's memory and her own grief. To everyone's surprise, Mary agreed to meet Oliver. She told Dr. Ashford that she had experienced something she couldn't explain. A few months earlier, she had been walking near Garden Lodge when she saw a young boy standing outside the gates, staring at the house with such longing that it disturbed her. When the boy noticed her watching, he smiled sadly and walked away. Mary couldn't shake the feeling that there was something profound in that moment. The meeting was arranged for December 2017 at a private Ginur location in London. Mary Austin, now in her 60s, arrived looking nervous and guarded. She had brought with her a small box containing personal items that had never been photographed or cataloged publicly. Oliver was 7 years old. When Mary walked into the room, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears streamed down his face. He ran to her and threw his arms around her waist. "Mary," he sobbed. "My Mary, you're here. You're older, but you're still beautiful. I missed you so much." Mary stood frozen, this small boy clinging to her, crying words that sounded impossible. Slowly, she knelt down and looked into Oliver's blue eyes. "If you're really Freddie, tell me something only he would know. Tell me about the ring." Oliver wiped his eyes, Without hesitation, he said, "I gave you a ring, a gold band with a small emerald. I told you to wear it on your left hand because you were my wife in every way that mattered, even if we couldn't be married legally. I told you that." "When I died, you should keep wearing it, because part of me would always be with you." Mary gasped. She held up her left hand, showing a gold ring with a small emerald. She had never mentioned this ring in any interview. She had never told anyone what Freddie said when he gave it to her. Those words were hers alone, a private moment between them in the early 70s. "Oh my God," she whispered. "How could you possibly know that?" She opened the box she had brought. Inside were personal items from Garden Lodge, a sketch Freddie had drawn of Mary, a handwritten note, a photograph. She showed them to Oliver one by one. Oliver picked up the sketch and smiled. "I drew this in 1975. We were in the flat on Holland Road. You were reading a book, and the light from the window was hitting your face just right. I loved drawing you. You were my favorite subject." He picked up the handwritten note. It was brief, just a few lines on expensive stationery. Oliver read it aloud. "My dearest, Mary, gone to the studio. We'll be late. There's champagne in the fridge and caviar. Have a party without me if you want. All my love, F." "I wrote that in 1982, Oliver said quietly. "I was working on Hot Space album. I knew I'd be in the studio all night, but I didn't want you to be alone on your birthday. So I left you champagne and caviar, your favorites. Did you have a party?" Mary shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "I sat alone and drank the champagne and ate the caviar and cried because I missed you even though we lived in the same city." The photograph was from the early days, before Queen became famous. A young Freddie and Mary at a market, laughing, holding hands. On the back, in Freddie's handwriting, "Kensington Market, 1970. The day I knew." "The day I knew I loved you," Oliver said, touching the photograph gently. "We had been friends for a few months. That day, you laughed at something silly I said, and I looked at you and thought, this is the person I want in my life forever. I was right. Even after death, you're still in my life." Mary began asking questions about their life together. Private memories, inside jokes, moments no one else knew about. Oliver answered everything accurately. "I loved you, Mary," he said, "but I couldn't be the husband you deserved. I couldn't give you the normal life you wanted. You were so brave. You stayed my friend when you could have hated me." Mary was crying openly. "You told me you would always love me. You said I was your common-law wife, your only real friend. You said when you died, if you could come back, you would find me again." "And I did," Oliver said simply. "I'm here. It took 20 years, and I'm in a different body. But I found you." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, Mary Austin was convinced that somehow, impossibly, she was talking to her old friend in the body of a 7-year-old child. But Oliver's memories weren't just about love and friendship. They included the darkness, too. The progression of AIDS, the fear, the physical deterioration, the pain. When Dr. Ashford asked him about his final months, Oliver's small face showed genuine anguish. "I knew I was dying. My body was failing. I had Kaposi's sarcoma lesions on my skin. I was losing weight. I could barely walk. The pneumonia made it hard to breathe. but I kept working as long as I could. I recorded Made in Heaven, even though I was so weak I could barely stand. I wanted to leave one more album. Music was all I had left. He described his last days at Garden Lodge with heartbreaking clarity. Phoebe and Jim took care of me. Mary visited every day. I was on so much morphine for the pain. I couldn't eat. I could barely speak. But I was at home, surrounded by my beautiful things, with the people who loved me. That mattered. On November 23, 1991, I released a statement about having AIDS. I couldn't hide it anymore. I was too sick. I wanted people to know the truth. The next day, November 24th, I died. It was evening. Jim was with me. Phoebe was there. I just stopped breathing. It was peaceful at the end. No more pain, just peace. Medical records confirm Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991, at approximately 7 p.m. from bronchial pneumonia resulting from AIDS. He had publicly announced his diagnosis just one day earlier. Oliver's knowledge extended beyond personal memories to professional details. Dr. Ashford arranged for him to meet Brian May, Queen's guitarist, in early 2018. May was cautious, protective of his late friend's memory, skeptical of claims about reincarnation. But he agreed to the meeting. The meeting took place at May's home studio. Oliver immediately identified the red special guitar and began describing specific songs, the creative process, the musical decisions behind Queen's biggest hits. Bohemian Rhapsody was my vision, but you brought it to life, Oliver said. Your guitar solo in the middle section was perfect. We Will Rock You was your idea. The stomp, stomp, clap rhythm. I thought it was brilliant. He talked about Live Aid in 1985. 20 minutes at Wembley Stadium. 72,000 people in the stadium, 2 billion watching worldwide. That performance defined Queen. I've never felt more alive than I did on that stage. By the end, May's skepticism transformed into bewildered acceptance. I don't understand how this is possible, May said to Dr. Ashford afterward. But that child knows things only Freddie knew. He doesn't just know facts. He understands the music from the inside. He feels it the way Freddie felt it. Perhaps the most compelling evidence came from Oliver's vocal ability. While his voice was still a child's voice, music teachers who worked with him were astonished by his range and technique. By age 8, Oliver could sing across 4 octaves, the same range Freddie Mercury possessed. His vibrato, his phrasing, his emotional delivery, all showed sophistication far beyond his years. A vocal coach analyzed recordings of Oliver singing. Her conclusion? This child has technique that takes decades to develop. His breath control, his use of vibrato, his ability to shift between chest voice and head voice seamlessly. These are skills professional singers work their entire careers to master. An 8-year-old shouldn't be able to do this. More remarkably, Oliver could perform in Freddie's style across different eras. He could mimic the raw rock sound of early Queen, the operatic grandeur of the mid-70s, the pop sophistication of the 80s. In 2019, when Oliver was 8 years old, Dr. Ashford organized a private event that would provide the ultimate test. She arranged for Oliver to visit Garden Lodge. Mary Austin still owned the house, though she rarely stayed there, finding it too filled with memories. She agreed to allow Oliver to visit, accompanied by his parents, Dr. Ashford, and a documentary crew. The visit took place on a gray November afternoon, 28 years after Freddie's death. Oliver stood outside the black gates on Logan Place, looking at the house with an expression of profound recognition and sadness. When Mary opened the gates and led them inside, Oliver's reaction was immediate. He walked through the house, knowing the layout perfectly. In the sitting room, he pointed to a wall. "There used to be a Japanese print of Mount Fuji there. Did you move it?" Mary nodded, stunned. "I moved it to the bedroom 10 years ago." He climbed to the master bedroom. "This is where I died," he whispered. "In that bed, looking out at the garden, with Jim holding my hand." He walked to the window and looked out at the Japanese garden Freddie had created. Tears streamed down his face. "I loved this garden. I designed every part of it. The koi pond, the stone lanterns, the maple trees. I could see it from my bed. It was the last beautiful thing I saw." Mary stood in the doorway, crying. "He spent hours looking at that garden in his final days. He said it brought him peace." Oliver turned to her. "It still does. Thank you for keeping it beautiful. Thank you for taking care of my home." The documentary crew captured everything. The footage would later be viewed millions of times online, sparking intense debate. Skeptics claimed it was an elaborate hoax, that Oliver had been coached, that his parents were seeking fame or money. But those who knew Freddie found it harder to dismiss. Peter Freestone said in an interview, "I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if I believe in reincarnation, but that child knows things he couldn't know. He has Freddie's mannerisms, his way of speaking, his sense of humor. It's uncanny." Brian May was more cautious, but equally puzzled. "There's something extraordinary about Oliver. Whether it's reincarnation or some other phenomenon we don't understand, I can't say. But he has a connection to Freddie that defies normal explanation." Dr. Ashford published her findings in a peer-reviewed journal in 2020. Her paper documented 156 verified claims, the meetings with Freddie's friends, the musical abilities, the emotional authenticity of Oliver's memories. She concluded that while she couldn't prove reincarnation scientifically, Oliver's case represented one of the strongest pieces of evidence she had encountered in 15 years of research. Critics remained unconvinced. Some suggested Oliver had access to obscure biographies or documentaries. Others proposed he had a photographic memory and had absorbed information unconsciously. A few even suggested the entire thing was a carefully orchestrated fraud. But none of these explanations could account for the private details that had never been published. The nickname Phoebe, the specific words Freddie said when giving Mary her ring, the exact layout of Garden Lodge's interior before any floor plans were publicly available, the intimate knowledge of recording sessions and creative processes. Today, Oliver Harrison is a teenager living in London. He still has the memories of Freddie Mercury, though he's learned to integrate them into his current life. He's pursuing music seriously, not trying to recreate Queen, but developing his own artistic voice, informed by the musical genius he remembers possessing in another life. He maintains relationships with Mary Austin and Brian May. Mary has said that having Oliver in her life has brought a strange kind of closure, a sense that Freddie's spirit somehow continues. Oliver's parents have struggled with the attention and controversy, but they support their son. "We didn't ask for this," Catherine Harrison said in an interview. "We're just ordinary people trying to raise a child who happens to have extraordinary memories. We don't know if it's reincarnation. We don't have all the answers. We just know that our son has experiences and knowledge that we can't explain." Oliver himself has a simple perspective. "I don't know why I remember being Freddie. All I know is that I was Freddie Mercury. I lived an incredible life. I made music that touched millions. I loved deeply and was loved in return. I died too young, with more music still inside me. Now I have another chance. I get to live again, to create again, to love again. That's a gift. The question of whether Oliver Harrison is truly the reincarnation of Freddie Mercury remains unanswered by science. Consciousness, memory, identity, the possibility of life after death, these are questions that have puzzled humanity for millennia. Oliver's case doesn't definitively answer them, but it provides compelling evidence that there may be more to existence than we currently understand. For those who loved Freddie Mercury, who mourned his death, who wished for just one more song, one more performance, Oliver's story offers something precious: hope. The possibility that genius doesn't truly die, that love transcends death, that the show must go on in ways we never imagined. Whether you believe Oliver's memories are genuine reincarnation or something else entirely, one thing is undeniable. His story captures something we all long to believe: that we are more than our physical bodies, that consciousness might survive beyond death, that the people we love, the artists who move us, might somehow return. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991. 20 years later, Oliver Harrison was born. The music continues, and perhaps in ways we don't fully understand, so does Freddie.